Tonight at 10, President Putin accuses Ukraine of terrorism for the attack on a bridge linking Russia to occupied Crimea. The explosion severely damaged an important supply route for Russian forces in Ukraine. Tonight, President Putin said this.
There is no doubt that this is an act of terrorism aimed at destroying Russia's critically important civilian infrastructure, and this was devised, carried out and ordered by the Ukrainian special services.
Meanwhile, Russian missile strikes in the dead of night kill at least 13 people in the southern city of Zaporizhia. President Zelensky said Ukraine's civilian population was subjected to constant terror by Russia. Also on the programme, the faces of the 10 victims of an explosion in County Donegal. They include 2 teenagers and a 5-year-old girl. And Max Verstappen reigns supreme in Japan to win the F1 World Championship for a second time, despite atrocious conditions. Good evening. President Putin has tonight accused Ukraine of an act of terrorism after a key strategic bridge built by Russia was badly damaged by an explosion on Saturday. His comments came after Russian missile strikes in the middle of the night killed at least 13 people in the city of Zaporizhia, bringing the death toll in and around the city to more than 60 people in the past 9 days. President Zelensky accused Russia of waging constant terror against Ukraine's civilian population. The missile strikes followed the attack on the 12-mile-long Kerch Bridge, which links Russia to occupied Crimea. Our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams reports now from the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv.
In Zaporizhia, this is what escalation looks like. A gaping hole where once there were homes. Rescue workers searching for the dead and the living. Moments after the blast, in the middle of the night, stunned, furious reactions. They destroyed a building at night at 2 a.m., he says. They simply destroyed a multi-story building.
We ran out into the street. When we left the corridor, a neighbor ran out with her eldest son, and she screamed that her husband was dead, and the whole wall was torn out. Their apartment fell into ours.
This was a civilian area, not a military target. Volunteers helped to clear the rubble. Local officials say scores of people were wounded. This industrial southern city is used to being hit, but its civilians are now bearing the brunt of Russia's anger. More than 60 killed in and around the city in the past 9 days. Officials say 12 missiles were fired from Russian warplanes flying safely over nearby occupied territory. Here in Kyiv, President Zelensky said these were merciless strikes on peaceful people. This, he said, was absolute evil perpetrated by savages and terrorists. It all came less than 24 hours after yesterday's dramatic attack on a key bridge linking Russia with the Crimean Peninsula. Russia said this was the result of a truck bomb. Others spoke of an audacious act of Ukrainian sabotage. Tonight, Vladimir Putin directly accused Kyiv.
There is no doubt that this is an act of terrorism aimed at destroying Russia's critically important civilian infrastructure, and this was devised, carried out and ordered by the Ukrainian special services.
Some road traffic has resumed. The physical damage can be repaired, but this was a profound psychological blow for Moscow. Up above, work on the ravaged railway bridge goes on. Russia says freight and passenger services have resumed. This bridge is vital to Moscow's war effort. It cannot afford to lose it. Paul Adams, BBC News, Kyiv.
Well, Ukraine says Moscow is targeting civilian areas because its forces are unable to respond on the battlefield. In recent weeks, Ukraine has managed to regain some territory in the south and the east, including the strategically important town of Liman. Our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale reports now from the front line just beyond Liman.
Ukraine's still advancing, still hunting down Russian positions. Here using a drone to spot them. Ukraine's retaken another dozen miles of territory over the past week here in the east. But the retreating Russians are still putting up a fight. It's quite intense, the fighting here.
Yeah. It's Russian artillery working now.
Russian guns haven't been silenced, but this barrage seems indiscriminate. The troops say, unlike theirs. They also see a huge difference in morale.
In Ukraine, we named that their army, it's meat. It's only meat because they don't save their people.
Do you think they're capable of retaking any of this territory you've liberated?
I'm sure that cannot.
Why are you sure?
Because they're weak. They're weak now. They're scared about us.
You feel safe?
Yeah, I feel safe because I'm on my land, so even the ground will help me.
This is the same ground President Putin recently declared forever Russia. But all that's been left by Russia is trash. This was a Russian position, and you can see just the rubbish strewn around, rations. There's even a Russian cap here. There's something for artillery shells there, just strewn across the area. And the Ukrainian forces say that's what makes them such an easy target, because they can see this rubbish when they're flying the drones and spot the Russian positions, making it easier for them to attack.
You want to see Russian helmet? It's from the future.
No.
That's a Russian helmet?
Yeah.
Ukrainian helmet and Russian helmet.
What the difference? An army of future.
Of bad, very bad future.
Recaptured territory too tells the story of a depleted Russian army. Ukraine's now captured more Russian armour than they've been supplied by the West. Dozens more vehicles lie wrecked, rusting, destroyed. Along with discarded ammunition, the Donbass is also littered with lethal mines. But liberation comes with a costly legacy. Bombed out homes and ruined infrastructure. Downed bridges, stations without trains, and the remnants of a population now just trying to survive. The people of Lyman, those who stay behind, have now gone through invasion and liberation and constant bombardment. Now they don't even have the basics: food, electricity and water. This is just a queue for bread, and there's not enough to go around. Winter is coming, and life isn't going to get any easier. Katerina worries for her children's future. But more than that, she still fears what Russia might do next.
They have a lot of power, which is why it is scary that they might return. Because the city has already suffered very badly, and if the city will be passed back and forth from hand to hand, then nothing will remain, including people. I no longer know who to believe or not to believe. We just want silence, peace, and electricity at least.
Help is slowly coming. Here, a couple of volunteers are spraying over the pro-Russian graffiti. But it'll take much more to erase the recent past. And Russia is still at their doorstep. Jonathan Beale, BBC News, Lyman.
Let's join our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, who's in Moscow for us. And Steve, these are President Putin's first remarks about the bridge explosion. What do you make of his language?
Well, first of all, Rita, the fact that we saw Vladimir Putin on a Sunday evening, that's interesting. That's unusual. That's important. It suggests, I think, the Kremlin wants to show that President Putin is in control of the situation, that he takes this attack seriously. How is he going to respond to it? Well, let's look at what he said. He called this an act of terror. And I wonder whether he's now going to reframe what he calls at the moment the special military operation into an anti-terrorist operation. There's been a lot of speculation about that in the Russian press. in recent days. It's unclear, though, what difference that would make. We may get some clues about how he's going to respond tomorrow, because Vladimir Putin will be chairing a meeting of the powerful Russian Security Council, although not everything that's said at these meetings is made public. But obviously this is a tense moment, reflected by the fact that Russian state television tonight said that the world had frozen on the threshold of nuclear Armageddon. But interestingly, other pro-Kremlin TV channels were trying to play down the attack on the bridge, and one of them said tonight the attackers had planned damage on a massive scale, but they failed because the bridge is still standing.
Steve, thank you. Steve Rosenberg there, reporting from Moscow. And there are more updates, news and analysis on BBC News Online. That's bbc.co.uk/news, and also by using the BBC News app. Police in the Republic of Ireland have named the 10 people who were killed by an explosion at a petrol station in a village in County Donegal. The victims include a 39-year-old woman and her 13-year-old son, and a 50-year-old man and his 5-year-old daughter. Police also confirmed that a man in his 20s remains in hospital in a critical condition. 7 other people who were injured in the explosion are still being treated in hospital, and they remain in a stable condition. Our Ireland correspondent Chris Page reports.
The youngest victim of the explosion was Shauna Flanagan Garway, who was 5. She was killed along with her dad, Robert. A mum and her son also died together, Catherine O'Donnell and 13-year-old James Monaghan. The other teenager who lost her life was Leona Harper. She was 14, a sports fan and a keen rugby player. There were 5 more victims: Jessica Gallagher, James O'Flaherty, Martin McGill, Martina Martin and Hugh Kelly. Creeslough has much mourning ahead. The emergency operation is over, but the grieving has just begun.
It will take many months and years for a community to come to terms with this, but right ahead of us are the sad and difficult days of funerals and saying goodbye to loved ones.
The raw reality of what's happened is taking hold in this otherwise idyllic part of Ireland. County Donegal is usually thought of as being an Irish haven, a place of rest and retreat. People in these closest of communities feel that one of the most valuable things they can do is simply to come together, to offer solidarity and sympathy to those who've been bereaved so suddenly.
Keep the families in your mind and your prayers.
In the village of Downings, hundreds came out for a vigil this evening. Among them were Neil and Sean Martin, whose mother Martina died in the shop where she worked. The sense of disbelief is still deepening.
Everybody's just going about with their heads down. Everybody feels it and everybody's mind is on it. Thinking about the families all the time, you know, and just people are devastated.
There's never been such an unexpected tragedy here. There's been speculation a gas leak caused the explosion, but the police say the investigation will take time. Immense suffering has been inflicted on Creeslough in only a split second. 10 candles on the church altar are the focus of unspeakable sorrow for each person gone. Chris Page, BBC News in Donegal.
The SNP leader and Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says she doesn't regret saying she detests the Tories in a TV interview. She was asked who she would prefer in power, the Conservatives or Labour.
Would I prefer a Labour government over a Tory government? I detest the Tories and everything they stand for, so it's not difficult to answer that question.
Well, let's speak now to our Scotland editor, James Cook, who's in Aberdeen, where the SNP annual conference is being held. So, James, Conservatives tonight questioning her choice of words.
Yes, that's right. Among those were the Conservative Cabinet Minister Nadhim Zahawi, who was on the same programme as Nicola Sturgeon, Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg. And Mr Zahawi described the comments as dangerous. That criticism was echoed by some of his colleagues. But as you've said this afternoon, the First Minister herself said she had nothing to apologise for, in her view. She said she did not regret those comments, telling the BBC that she had not been referring to individuals or even supporters of the Conservative Party, but to Tory policies. And this afternoon, that theme was really taken up by her deputy, the Deputy First Minister John Swinney, on this stage here. He talked about the Conservatives being, in his words, a bunch of reckless hypocrites, saying they were causing misery and crippling public services with a new age of austerity. Now, Mr Swinney's solution to that, he said, was for the Scottish people to vote for independence. Will there be a referendum on independence, though? Well, that may be up to the Supreme Court, which this week will hear the arguments for and against allowing the Scottish Parliament to pass legislation to hold one.
James, thank you. James Cook reporting. In Iran, the state-run television channel has been hacked to broadcast a protest against the country's government and supreme leader. Viewers saw the usual live programming interrupted without warning. The images show Ayatollah Ali Khamenei with a target on his head, along with pictures of women said to have been killed by police, and captions encouraging people to join demonstrations. In Taiwan, tomorrow is National Day when, despite the recent threats and intimidation from China, the island will celebrate its democratic political system and open society. It comes as recent opinion polls suggest a greater number of people than ever now identify as Taiwanese and want the country to remain separate from China. In response, Beijing is threatening war and it's waging an economic battle, recently banning the import of some 2,000 Taiwanese products. From Taiwan, our correspondent Rupert Wingfield-Hayes sent this report.
It may not look like it, but these ponds in southern Taiwan are filled with gold. The huge fish thrashing around in Suguozheng's ponds are called grouper. On the tables of Beijing and Shanghai, each one can fetch up to $2,000 US. 80% of Taiwan's grouper used to go to China. Now it's zero. Beijing's import bans are hitting Taiwan where it hurts the most. So is it working? Older fishermen like me are nervous, he says. But the younger generation, they're not worried. They think, fine, if China doesn't want to buy our fish, we'll sell to other markets all over the world. China isn't just threatening Taiwan's economy. Since August, it's made repeated threats to take the island by force, test firing dozens of missiles across the Taiwan Strait. But if Taiwan people are scared, they're not showing much sign of it. It's election season here, and at nightly rallies, candidates are on stage appealing to voters. Unlike in China, people here get to choose who rules them, and they're not about to give that up.
Taiwan is justifiably proud of its democracy. There is nothing like this anywhere else in the Chinese-speaking world. But it's not just Taiwan's democracy that is threatened by Xi Jinping. It's all of the rights and freedoms that people enjoy here, their whole way of life.
At their home in the south of Taipei, Mota and Siti are playing with their 2-year-old daughter Lin Chen. In 2019, Taiwan became the first country in Asia to legalise same-sex marriage. Siti is now expecting baby number 2. Being homosexual was something you had to hide, says Mota. But things have changed now. We're out in the open and the government has accepted and recognised us. For couples like this, the stakes couldn't be higher. Siti says if China wants Taiwan, it will have to invade. And if that happens, people like them will have no choice but to leave. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, in Taipei.
Time for all the sport now. Here's Lizzie Greenwood-Hughes at the BBC Sports Centre. Lizzie.
Thank you, Rita. Good evening. Max Verstappen sealed a second successive Formula One title with 4 races left after winning a dramatic Japanese Grand Prix in terrible weather conditions. But once again, his championship-winning moment was marred by confusion over the rules, as Ollie Foster reports.
Max Verstappen has retained his world title fair and square and with plenty to spare. No final lap dramas like last year when Formula One veered away from its own rules. But there was still confusion at Suzuka. Torrential rain had shortened the Japanese Grand Prix, and he presumed, as most did, that despite taking the checkered flag, his winning points would be halved as well. He was wrong, and when Charles Leclerc was bumped down to third for cutting a corner, Verstappen was told mid-interview that the title was his again.
What can I say? Incredible, of course. Very special also to do it here in front of all the Japanese fans. Incredible.
The race will also be remembered for a chaotic first lap and an incident that's being investigated as a matter of urgency. 8 years after Jules Bianchi collided into a recovery vehicle and died on the same track, Pierre Gasly had a near miss this time. Bianchi's father joined the criticism of race organisers, saying they had no respect for the life of the drivers or respect for Jules' memory. As well as crowning the 2022 champion today, Formula One's launched a thorough review of the Suzuka Grand Prix, and I'll hope that the last 4 races of the season are much smoother than this one. Ollie Foster, BBC News.
Match of the Day 2 is on after the news with highlights of some really good games in the Premier League today, but here come the results. Arsenal are back on top of the table after beating Liverpool 3-2 in a game that had everything. England's Bukayo Saka scored twice, including the winning penalty. Elsewhere, there were also wins for Crystal Palace, West Ham and Manchester United. Wales are second in their Women's Rugby Union World Cup pool after beating Scotland 18-15 with the last kick of the game in New Zealand in what could be a crucial opening fixture for the home nations. Joe Curry reports.
It may be their opening game of the World Cup, but in the tough terrain of Pool A, defeat for Scotland or Wales would make a route through to the knockout stages an uphill battle. Plenty of pressure then, which Wales rode the better in the opening minutes. Before Scotland bit back, their forwards forcing their way over the line and Lana Skeldon getting her team on the scoreboard. And that woke Wales up once more. Kayleigh Powell on the end of this well-worked try as they increased their lead. In a frustrating first half, a few opportunities for Scotland, their chance to reduce the gap before the break went begging. After the restart, though, they found a breakthrough. With Wales a player down, Megan Gaffney touched down in the corner to give her side hope. And minutes later, she was in again to set up a huge final few minutes. Helen Nelson had missed all 4 of her kicks in this game so far. Could she produce a sensational finish? She couldn't, but Wales could. A last-minute penalty awarded, Kira Bevan shouldering the pressure to snatch victory with the last kick of the game. The celebrations that followed, worthy of winning the Cup themselves. Joe Curry, BBC News.
And ahead of cricket's T20 World Cup, England beat Australia in Perth. It's all on the BBC Sport website. Back to you, Rita.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. Time now for a look at the weather. Here is Helen Willits. Helen, it's been lovely here, but that looks miserable.
Absolutely, a tale of two halves today, Rita. 19 degrees, 9 hours of sunshine for parts of England and Wales. Scotland, Northern Ireland, it was rather wet once again. Another 40 millimetres fell in Stirlingshire today. That just adds to what has been a really very wet week. Some of these values here equating to about 3/4 of the average October rainfall for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland in the space of a week. It is clearing now, though. This was a Weather Watcher picture sent in from Nairn around half an hour ago. And here is the rain. It's still really quite active, this weather front. There are gusty winds. We've had gales in the north, still buffeting the north, actually. And it's now heading its way into England and Wales. So some quite miserable conditions if you are travelling through the rest of the evening, overnight, tomorrow morning's rush hour, because it'll drag its heels to clear from the south and the east, dampening the ground, mistiness over the hills, quite blustery winds, but it will actually be milder as a consequence. Chillier, though, further north, and that's despite those strong to gale force winds buffeting the Northern Isles and the north of Scotland for much of the day, actually throwing in some showers. But in contrast to today, much drier and brighter for Scotland and Northern Ireland. We clear that rain away from England and Wales, and it's a largely dry day with sunny spells, just the odd shower. The winds from the northwest, so we'll notice a slightly fresher feel, and temperatures will be perhaps a degree or two down, notably for England and Wales, of course, where we've had all that fine weather through the weekend, even though we need the rain. Then as we go through tomorrow night, again, it looks dry, but increasingly clear. More likely we're going to have some fog problems and a touch of frost for some parts of England and Wales in particular under the starry skies, which means another fine day on Tuesday. The dry day for many, but the fog will be quite slow to clear. It takes till about mid-morning at this time of year to clear, and then by the time we get to Wednesday the weather fronts are back, and it does look much more active as we head towards the middle and end of the week. We'll be keeping an eye out towards the Atlantic, Rita, for the next low pressures to roll in.
OK, thank you very much, Helen. And that is all from us at BBC News at 10. The news continues on BBC One, as now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Good night.